Hey folks, this lecture series is going to be all about how to write your method sections, which sections you need to have, what should be in them, and even specific statistical information that you'll need for your analytic strategy section. So let's get started with just those major sections and what goes in them, and I'll share my screen to get us started. So for this week, you need to read your APA manual, table 3.1 especially, but really that whole section 3.5. But if you need to go back and refer to anything, that table 3.1 has pretty much everything you need to know about what goes in any section of an APA style manuscript. You should read your Schweigert textbook, chapter 5, which is all about statistics as well. And this week, you're going to be writing your introduction based on feedback on the outline that I gave you and outlining your method section. And don't forget also to study for test 2 that's going to open up next week. So let's start with the purpose of the method section and its specific subsections you'll need to have: participants, materials, procedure, and analytic strategy. Now, I'm saving that analytic strategy for the end of the lecture, or more for the Schweigert chapter 5 statistics section. So we're going to skip it and talk about these others and then dive into a lot more detail about how to do analytic strategy. The method section is to tell your readers how your study will be done, right? So in a study that's already been conducted, like the way y'all have presented your observational projects, you talk about what has been done. But you are going to talk about what you plan to do since your survey research paper is a proposal. How will your study be done? Make it detailed enough that somebody could read your paper and conduct your study. The participants section has a few details like inclusion and exclusion criteria. That means what features do you use to decide whether somebody should participate in your study or not? Are you looking for people of certain genders or races or income levels or something like that? People with a certain diagnosis versus not? You might need a certain amount in each group, like people with major depressive disorder and people with no disorders, or whatever your independent variable is going to be. You also need to put any target demographic characteristics. So if you want your sample to be representative of like the racial demographics of the United States or something like that, indicate that. And you will put the number of participants that you need for your analyses. Now, you can't write that just yet. We have to do our analytic strategy section first and then come back and put that information in. So in upcoming parts of this lecture series, I have information about how you can figure out what kind of statistics you need to do, and that will tell you how many participants you would need if you were to conduct this study. You also need to talk about any sampling procedures. Did you do anything specific to make your sampling representative of a particular population that you're interested in? And where and how will you find them? And how will your participants see your survey? Are you going to assign them to any groups? Will those participants get any kind of incentives to participate? So since you are dreaming this up as a proposal and not actually conducting it, you could imagine that you had a budget for this and you could pay them a little bit of money or give them some kind of gift card or whatever you think would be an appropriate compensation for participating in your study. Next, you have your materials subsection, which will be a level 2 header, by the way. Participants, materials, procedure, and analytic strategy will all be a level 2 header under that level 1 header of method. In materials, you're going to define all the variables that you plan to use in your analyses. So, or it could just be a single analysis if you have one hypothesis. You are not required to have more than one hypothesis, but it is possible for you to have multiple. So that's why I include hypotheses, plural. You can describe a covariate if you have one. I will explain these later in the lecture as well, and they are optional. So just know once you go through that information and you decide what variables are going to be in your analysis, you have to come back and write that here in your materials section. Describe the questionnaire creation process, like how many questions you created and then how many you deleted and how many you ended up with in your final survey. Explain the types of variables as nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio, which we are about to study in a little upcoming part of this lecture series. Describe also the scores that you use for your independent and dependent variables, whether it came from adding up the responses to some questions or averaging the responses to some questions, or whether it just came from a single question. I also describe this process later in the questionnaire, later in this lecture series. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, that is totally fine. You're going to have to do a little bit of backtracking as you go to write this. So you rewatch this part of the video as many times as you would need after you get more of that statistical background. And then in the procedure section, you're going to list all of the data collection procedures. If a participant took your study, which steps would they go through? They are going to have to read a consent form and click yes on it, so that needs to be in everybody's. They're going to answer questions about blank variable first, and then some questions about why, and then some questions about another variable. So put it in the order that you would put your items in your survey. And then the survey will end and thank them for their time. And then you're going to talk about how you would deliver any incentive if you chose to have one. I also want to backtrack really quickly and remind you that in this materials section, this is where you would say something like, all survey items proposed to be used in this study are found in the appendix. Okay, and the appendix is just where you're going to copy all your survey items that you have created once you finalize it, and that will go after your references. You don't need to have your finalized survey done for this methods outline that you need to be working on. That will just eventually go in your final draft of the paper, just giving you a heads up.